could you say your last name? Thank you. And Beebe and Regina Yoong. And the panel is just simply entitled Connections. So given that we have four presenters and we'd like to end exactly on time, please be careful of your timing. Try to keep it to about 15 minutes each so that we have time for questions. Some people have been up, and it's people are here around the world, and some people have been up for a long time and need some sleep. And they're eager to hear your talks as I am before that. So let's start with Faye translating Emily Dickinson to Filipino.
Hello, can you see my slides?
Can you make it full screen, Faye?
Um,
If you can't, it's okay. Just give it a try, a quick try. That's
is
much
that
better. Yes.
okay?
Thank you.
So, good morning from Manila. No, it's 12:15 a.m. in Manila, and um, thank you for this opportunity to participate in the meeting. I would like to share about translating Emily Dickinson as an activist, a poet, a small press publisher, and a non-academic individual. So, I started taking on translation in 2020 during the pandemic when the UK-based Tilted Axis Books invited Gantala Press, the feminist small press that we formed in 2015, to collect writing by women in the Philippines. We translated poems and essays by workers, peasants, urban poor women, and people's organizations to English. That was where I first saw the primary importance of translation, which is to have access to the wisdom of another language. So Gantala Press began tackling translation as an advocacy. For this, I chose to work on Alexandra Kollontais' novella, Red Love, or more specifically, its English version on Marxists.org. An important consideration was that the novella and its translation were already in the public domain and accessible to small press publishers. But the prime factor in choosing this work was that the author was a revolutionary and that the Filipino masses would surely find the romantic story relatable. It was not an issue, at least to me, that I would be translating from a secondary language. My main objective was to publish a work from where Filipino activists could draw lessons, whether on the Russian Revolution or life in a socialist society. As you may know, the Philippines has long been waging an anti-imperialist struggle, and Filipino activists are being red tagged and demonized, as well as imprisoned or murdered um, by state forces. So eventually, I gained the confidence to do a more difficult task, which was translating a book of poems. Emily Dickinson is, of course, a perfect subject for many reasons that anyone here can probably explain better than I could. But mainly, I chose Dickinson because her language is English, and yet it is an English that is so different and unique from the English that was imposed upon us by empire. And so I felt that there was more room for exploring Emily Dickinson's poetry using Filipino. So I engaged with Dickinson and completed my translation of 100 poems within 3 to 5 years. I used her work as the basis of some of my own poems. This was also the time when the poet and revolutionary Kerima Tariman was martyred in a military encounter in 2021. The poet and activist Amanda Etchanis was imprisoned on false charges in 2020. And Marites Nicart released the first book of poetry written by a peasant woman in the Philippines in 2025. As a feminist publisher, Gantala Press was involved in this interconnection between activism and literature by publishing these 3 books. So these are their books, no? The difference between among Dickinson's poetry and the poetry of the 3 activists is clear. While Dickinson wrote in her famous room, at the homestead, Tariman wrote at the guerrilla zone, Echeniz wrote in prison, and Nicart wrote in an agricultural land that large corporations have been trying to grab for decades. I think that this also reflects the difference or contradiction between my publishing practice and my practice as a quote unquote poet. So, as a poet and activist during the pandemic, it seemed appropriate to work on Dickinson's inward looking poems inside my quiet apartment while continuing to oppose the fascist government by publishing militant literary books. So for me, translation is what connects the two practices of writing poetry and feminist publishing. In translating Dickinson, I got to personally enjoy her works as a woman who also reads and writes poetry. Meanwhile, I translated Echeniz to English in the midst of the campaign for her immediate release, and she was released in January. I also translated Nicart's poems for readers in the diaspora. So in the end, all the gathered wisdom and knowledge of the authors and translators are shared with the readers of each language or both languages. So I translated Dickinson when the Philippines was guest of honor at the 2025 Frankfurt Book Fair. Independent presses and some writers responded to the call to boycott the Frankfurt Book Fair due to its perceived support of the genocide in Palestine. A related issue was the Philippine government's enthusiasm to translate and sell Philippine literature in the global market, while local literary production is not supported in the same way. Majority of the works translated under the Guest of Honor program were written in English. There was no program for translating foreign works, such as Palestinian literature, to the local languages. So I translated Dickinson under the presidency of the son of the former dictator, who faces issues of fascism and corruption, like the other presidents before him. Under the presidency of his father, the Philippines similarly got buried deep in foreign debt at the expense of our natural resources. That was also the time when Filipino writers wanted to define our national identity, perhaps to counter the cultural and economic neocolonialism that was bleeding our country dry. One thing the writers did was to establish that Filipino was as valid as any other world language, and they tried to prove this through translation. So Eliot, Pound, Rilke, and other male foreign poets were translated to Filipino. The only women poets featured in two translation anthologies in Filipino were Dickinson, Elizabeth Barrett Browning, and Gabriela Mistral. In the 1970s, revolutionaries also embarked on translating Marxist-Leninist and Maoist texts to Filipino and other vernacular languages to, of course, spread the word among the people. Artists and writers were encouraged to serve the masses, the peasants and workers, to raise their consciousness in the anti-imperialist and nationalist struggle. As an activist inevitably working within the mainstream profit-oriented industries of writing and publishing, I always try to justify translating a Western and middle-class writer from an era that I could not even begin to imagine. So Dickinson's poems are not usually deemed political or for the masses. In fact, she herself did not aspire to be published and read widely. So on this problem, I turned to Mao Zedong, who said, "We must take over all the fine things in our literary and artistic heritage, critically assimilate whatever is beneficial, and use them as examples when we create works out of the literary and artistic raw materials in the life of the people of our own time and place. We must on no account reject the legacies of the ancients and the foreigners or refuse to learn from them, even though they are the works of the feudal or bourgeois classes." Excuse me. Likewise, taking over legacies and using them as examples must never replace our own creative work. Uncritical transplantation or copying from the ancients and the foreigners is the most sterile and harmful dogmatism in literature and art. So it is significant, therefore, that translation is not merely transferring or copying, but a fervent co-creating. According to Susan Bassnett, translation is rewriting and reflowering in an enabling language. It would also be helpful to consider the Filipino Marxist Adele Garciliano's idea on the possible merging of elements that are metaphysical and dialectical in art, the merging of bourgeois and proletarian elements to realize what he called a language that mirrors the bestiary of the present and the unfolding future. So instead of merely importing, which is the practice in an import-dependent, export-oriented economy like the Philippines, no? In translation, Filipinos are able to claim Dickinson's genius and wisdom as our own. Dickinson wrote about love, desire, loneliness, death, science, philosophy, time, nature, sexuality, and others, like the best of our revolutionaries who were also poets. Her poems are surprisingly relatable to Filipino readers in the 21st century. My favorite is her poem on the saints, no? Read Dear How Others Strove, which I feel can also be applied to activists who renounced their comfortable lives to serve the people and were martyred. You may have heard of the news, no, of the activists, including Filipino American activists who were murdered by state forces in Negros last April. So it has long been established that a text is better understood if read in one's language. When I translated Red Love to Filipino, I better appreciated the slogan, Simple Living, Hard Struggle, of Filipino activists, which can also be gleaned from the Russian novel. Likewise, no, translating Emily Dickinson to Filipino and having a small press publish it in the Philippines despite the perpetual unprofitability of poetry, especially of poetry in Filipino, demonstrates that Philippine literature's participation in the international exchange of knowledge does not necessarily have to be within the language of commerce and capital, or limited by what can or cannot be sold at the Frankfurt Book Fair. It shows that international knowledge exchange can happen here in the Philippines, where the majority of Filipino readers are, and where the people's struggle is. So to read Dickinson in Filipino is a privilege that Filipinos deserve, especially those who study poetry and its possibilities. Thank you. Oh,
I think, Liza, you're on mute.
I'm so sorry. Thank you, Faye. That was a beautiful talk and very relevant to today. I think many of us recognize your struggles and um, are are increasingly aware of the importance of speaking out against them. So appreciate very much your sharing the particular context of your translation work, and it would be lovely to hear more. So next we have Stephen Rojcewicz, Emily Dickinson Declaims Latin.
Sure. I'm going to talk about Socrates. Now, you may not remember this or realize this, but that was Emily Dickinson's nickname when she was a Latin student at the academy. And there's a lot of repercussions to Socrates. He challenges things, he's a master of language, he doesn't accept conventional wisdom. I propose that Dickinson's poetry and her letters not only demonstrate the abiding influence exerted by her study of Latin and especially Virgil's Aeneid while attending Amherst Academy, but also they testify to her later engagement with classical works. She began her formal study of Latin at the Amherst Academy, where she was a Latin scholar. Female students were divided into Latin and English scholars depending on their ability. Only boys were able to learn Greek at the academy, though, formally. She attended Amherst Academy from 1840 to 1847. She started Latin during her second year at the academy when she was about to turn 11, and she probably completed 4 years of that study, although she often missed school because of illness. Her female friends gave each other classical nicknames. Abby Wood was Plato. Emily was Socrates. In September 1847, she enrolled at Mount Holyoke Female Seminary. where she did not study Latin. The school had 3 levels, junior, middle, and senior. After her 6 weeks review of junior courses, she entered the middle level. She was exempt from taking the courses required for those who were not proficient in Latin. This indicated that she had proven close acquaintance with at least 4 books of Virgil's Aeneid, which was the school's requirement. She left school after 1 year, a few months short of her 18th birthday, after completing 3 terms, including a summer semester. Dickinson acquired her subsequent education in the classics through reading reference works, translations, retellings in English. The home contained standard comprehensive reference works of classical culture by Lempriere and Charles Anthon, plus Bullfinch's The Age of Fable, which is a mythology textbook. The household subscribed to the Atlantic Monthly, which not only published critical reviews, but occasional classical translations, including translations of Sappho by Thomas Wentworth Higginson. In addition, young Dickinson consulted Noah Webster's American Dictionary of the English Language, which was very prolix in giving Latin derivations of words. Among the books at home were English versions of Homer, works by Shakespeare, Elizabeth Browning, Helen Hunt Jackson, all of whom frequently allude to Greco-Roman mythology and literature. The impact of Latin in classical studies on Dickinson can be found in Latin phrases in her poems and letters, Latin quotations, made-up Latin phrases, her vocabulary and syntax, utilization of classic mythology as well as Greek and Roman history, and especially direct quotes and allusions when she writes about themes of intense meaning to her, such as the importance and permanence of her writings. Her use of direct Latin occurs mostly in early poems and letters and is often deliberately irregular for comic effect. Her first publication ever had a lot of Latin in it, although it was anonymous and it was published without her knowledge. There was a Valentine letter in February 1850. She wrote a letter to, probably it was George Gould, a friend of her brother at Amherst, beginning Magnum Bonum, and including such made-up Latin as Var Alarum, Man Reformum, Life Perfectum, Mundum Changum. The letter was printed in the Indicator, the Amherst College literary magazine. Her very early poem, Franklin II, written in 1852, begins Sic transit gloria mundi and contains other standard Latin phrases such as dum vivamus, veni vidi vici, and memento mori. In an 1855 letter to her friend Susan Gilbert, she calls herself at risk of becoming femina insania, acknowledging that she made up the Latin. One noteworthy direct quotation by Dickinson occurs as a book inscription. I put on the chat, you might have to scroll up and down to see it, the flyleaf from her Latin Virgil textbook, which I'm using with permission of Amherst College. She had shared her Virgil textbook with Abby Wood, who sat at the same school table with her. Both made some notes of the book in pencil. In 1855, Emily gave the book as a going-away gift to Abby. On the flyleaf, she wrote in pencil, Forsan et haec olim meminissa juavit, in parentheses, Aeneid 1-203. She translates it, afterwards you may rejoice at the remembrance of these our school days. When I am far, far away, then think of me, E. Dickinson. A significant use of Latin occurs in the June 11, 1852 letter to her friend Susan Gilbert, hand-delivered by her father, who was a delegate to the Whig Convention in Baltimore, where Susan was then residing. Dickinson states that she wishes to attend the political convention. Why can't I be a delegate to the great Whig convention? Don't I know all about Daniel Webster and the tariff and the law? Then, Susie, I could see you during a pause in the session. Then she uses a Latin phrase, the standard conclusion to Cato the Elder's speeches. Delenda est America, Massachusetts et al. So if she can't participate and give speeches, America must be destroyed, Massachusetts et al. Talk about a radical Dickinson. This sentence is immediately followed by the conclusion of the letter, which is Martha Nell's book. Open me carefully. There's no full stop to the sentence. Dickinson's phrase, open me carefully, is open, open-ended, refers not only to the current letter, but to all her communications. She is telling her readers to examine her words, including the Latin words, with close attention. Emily assumes that Susan would know the Latin expression delenda est means must be destroyed. Although this letter is playfully bombastic, it does indicate a wish to create something that would have an impact on others. Emily would do so, not through speeches at a convention, but by way of her writings. For this purpose, for those who remember any Latin, Emily thundered a gerundum. The study of Latin also influenced Dickinson through use of vocabulary, syntax, word position, mythology, historical examples, or sorts for some poems. In reference to her vocabulary, she uses the word ablative in 3 poems. Must be a record for an American poet. For those of us who study Latin, ablative is forever linked to the grammatical construction, the ablative absolute. You may not know exactly what it is, but it's the stuff. She also has the tendency to link a polysyllabic Latin word with a 1-syllable Anglo-Saxon word, especially at the end of a poem in the last line. Some examples: an admiring bog, obliterate the need, vitality to clog, and her rescinded bud. An instance of word positioning is, from cocoon forth a butterfly, as lady from her door emerged. Awkward in English. The sentence is perfectly routine Latin syntax. In addition, her use of mythology includes referring to Prometheus' sept of fire and Pegasus as a source of inspiration. After her brother's friend, Fraser Stearns, died in the Civil War, she began a poem beginning, "It don't sound so terrible quite as it did. I run it over. Dead. Brain. Dead. Put it in Latin. Left at my school. Seems it don't shrink so under rule." Her wish to put it in Latin is more than just distancing. Latin, with its structure, rigor, and beauty, in her words, under rule, helped her place emotions in perspective. What is probably Dickens' most famous poem, I'm Nobody, Who Are You, 1861, also has strong connections to classical literature. Jane Donahue Eberwein argued in 1983 that nobody is a reflection of no man, the pseudonym used by Ulysses in Alexander Pope's translation in the Odyssey, A Book in the Household. The first stanza of a poem reflects a conspirial sense that Dickinson shared with the crew. He tells Polyphemus, I'm nobody, I'm no man. Stanza 2 is the opposite. It shows the danger of how dreary to be somebody. Ulysses sells his real name to the Cyclops, who then brings the wrath of Poseidon, Neptune, down on him. There's one Dickinson poem that has long been recognized as reflecting a Latin work. Ralph Marcelino noted in 1950 that certain lines of her 1865 poem, It's an Honorable Thought, allude to portions of Horace Odes 330, one of the most famous odes of Horace, his own prediction of his literary normality. It is an honorable thought that weave immortal place, though pyramids decay, and kingdoms like the orchard flit russetly away. For Horace prophesies that I will not completely die, non omnis moriar in Latin. Dickens writes, weave, first person plural, immortal place. Horace begins with, I have perfected, exege, a monument outlasting bronze and loftier than the site of royal pyramids, regalique situ pyramidum. Dickens echoes with and pyramid, and Horace's words as one word that means and royal becomes and kingdoms in Dickinson, though pyramids decay. I offer the hypothesis that Dickinson deliberately echoed Horace Ode as a statement that her poems will not completely die. In a letter from 1853, she alludes to her poems as immortal blossoms. The wish for literary immortality is not in the hope of personal fame, but reflects the conviction that her words will fulfill the prophecy in her poem, A Word Made Flesh is Seldom. A word that breathes distinctly has not the power to die. Like this consent of language, this loved philology. Although Dickinson shunned publicity and fame, she believed, I think, that her writings would survive, as shown by her conscientiously preserving the poems. Latin provided Dickinson with vocabulary, syntax, word position, historical and mythological references. More importantly, when Dickinson writes that her words would live, when she expresses the wish to make species, if not, America must be destroyed. And when she deals with intense emotions, for example, grief over someone's left, she finds empowering resources from her study of Latin and the ancient classics.
Thanks so much, Stephen. That was fascinating and only possible with someone who has a deep knowledge of Latin and Dickinson. So I learned a lot. Just listening to you was a pleasure. Thank you.
60 years after English in high school, she convinced me of the power and wonder of Dickinson, especially at looking at the manuscripts.
Yes. Well, I hope we have more time to talk, but thank you so much. So next we have Anne Beebe, and it sounds like it's going to be a very different topic. I never meant to cause you any sorrow, Prince. I'm sorry, I haven't.
Oh, you're reading that correctly. Prince's Purple Rain.
Here we go. I never meant to cause you any sorrow, Prince's Purple Rain, and Emily Dickinson's Purple Host.
Is share screen working? And
Well,
am I at full screen?
Could you hit slideshow and see if that works? Yeah, from beginning.
Okay.
Yes.
Is it working?
Good. Thank you.
Okay. Now, a few years ago, with all the virtual stuff, I decided from that point on, as a personal quest, anytime I do a virtual conference, it's a presentation. I'm not reading a paper, right? So that means we're starting with some trivia questions, people. So, Purple Rain. What artist inspired the song Purple Rain? Any guesses?
Was it?
Shout them out.
Oh, what artist? Was it Dickinson?
Inspired. No, we wish. Wouldn't that be great? No, Bob Seger. Really very much a financial thing. He wanted a stadium song. And so, what can I do? What artist did Prince ask to write lyrics for Purple Rain? No one guessed. Stevie Nicks. But she was just intimidated. So it ended up Prince and his band Revolution wrote them. Where did Prince find the phrase Purple Rain? No, I'm sorry, you guys aren't doing great.
We're hopeless.
From America, Homecoming, for the song Ventura Highway. Sorry, boy, I've been hit by a purple rain.
Stop it.
All right, last trivia question. Why did Prince feel the need to contact Jonathan Cain of Journey? So you're about to have this song in your head. Because Prince felt Purple Rain and Journey's Faithfully were too close together. And so he wanted to make sure that there weren't any problems in terms of copyright or anything. So now just saying that word faithfully, I bet that that song is in your head. Okay, so Emily Dickinson and Prince. Why? Why? Because of the theme really connecting. And I set myself the challenge, right? What is, to me, the oddest, weirdest connection I could make to show yet again the complete relevancy and how Emily Dickinson, there's no six degrees of separation with Emily Dickinson, right? There's just one degree. Emily Dickinson can be connected to anyone and everything. So I set myself that particular challenge. But also, as you start looking and thinking about Emily Dickinson and Prince and their backgrounds, their personas, these are just some quick key lines. Emily Dickinson, the poet's lack of a settled identity, or her refusal to become a public figure, or to respond to celebrity and culture's blurring of distinctions between public and private. And let me say, it's just really weird for me to be quoting from Professor Finnerty when I know he's right here on the call. Or the privacy of self-protection and publicity of fully expressed intimacy, or the illusions and setting up of a public persona, and the how connected to literary, cultural, social, philosophical, religious conventions, but then at different times questioning, challenging, and forcing listeners to do the same thing in a highly self-conscious way. Well, then you look at what people are already saying about Prince, and obviously Prince and his very fluid sense of identity. Prince's challenges to the rigid norms in his lyrics. Obviously, that's Emily Dickinson all over it. I didn't underline this, but the massive cultural change precipitated by and that he's participating in, that's Dickinson as well. Again, with Prince, Prince in terms of a set of shifting signifiers and that permit, and I would say require, an active reading. And I'd say we'd apply that as well to Emily Dickinson. So some of these quotes, maybe if I had taken some contextualization out and just used phrases, you'd been hard pressed if I'd done another trivia quiz. Is this a critic talking about Emily Dickinson or talking about Prince, right? So in a lot of ways, their public personas, how they approach language, how they approach what it is they want to achieve in their performances, right? Lyric performances, or in addition with Prince, his public performance, singing of the plays. There are just a lot of parallels, I think, between Emily Dickinson and Prince. But if not, just say no in the chat. So then I was thinking, okay, Emily Dickinson and Prince, there's really too much to go on. What would work for a presentation, right? So then I'm just thinking, what is visually appealing? What can, and particularly for this conference, I didn't know at the time that I would be in the last presentation of the day, and that some people apparently are pulling, 24, 36-hour, shifts here. And so what would be visually engaging and what would be visually stimulating for people? So thinking about purple, in essence. So purple as a color, in terms of, so I did a little research in terms of purple. Colors between every single language, between 2 and 11 basic color terms, one of which is purple. And then as you look at the OED purple, that all of these definitions to a certain degree, not in the song Purple Rain, but most certainly in Dickinson's poetry, carry these different elements, right? Carry the elements of royalty, definition A1A, carry the definition of mourning or penitence, A2C, A2D, the color of blood, right? A3A, the gaudiness with the idea of purple prose, right? Of B1A, the Tyrian, and Emily Dickinson does use the phrase Tyrian in her poetry and in letters. So an understanding that the original purple came from those mollusks, the purpura and murex dust, but that really more of a red. So also now a blending of genres. When we say purple, we don't even have the same, not only the image I showed of all the different kinds of purples that we have today, but also at that time period, our earliest understanding of purple was really, to us, would read more crimson today. The B2, A, C, and so forth, the connection with of disease, and as well as simply being a verb to purple something, right? So all of these, I think, as we start looking at Dickinson's poems, will carry some layers. Just history of purple, literally witnesses under torture. In the Roman times, they put all sorts of limitations on purple and purple dye because it was so expensive. And so in terms of more recent history, purple as a color as trademarked. The Supreme Court has actually ruled that color can act as a symbol, and color can be inherently distinctive, right? Creating clear associations in the minds of people. And as we know, hopefully you're not hungry, purple, one of the most famous purples that's trademarked is the Cadbury purple. I'm here in Texas, and so when you think purple and you think legal issues, you think Sandra Cisneros' house in San Antonio. It's a historic house, and the Historical Association actually objected when she originally, in the 90s, painted her house purple, and huge furor. And at one point later, Cisneros wrote an article about how color is language, right? I painted my house a traditional color because purple is historic. It's language. It tells a story. Right. So all of these elements tell me that when thinking about Emily Dickinson and with Prince, yeah, purple is going to carry some connotations. And so, no, we aren't going through all these poems, right? But here are some selected phrases. Emily Dickinson in purple, and I think I've sent the slide in the PowerPoint in. It'll be obviously in the video, but welcome to take borrow any of these slides, put them in a lecture or whatever you want. But we have from 58 to 82 all of these different, her use of purple. And if we go back to the OED slide, her use of purple across almost all of those definitions. As we know, Dickinson loved her dictionary, read her dictionary, sometimes played with different definitions. And so I think she's doing that here. From her letters as well, we have references to purple, to multiple recipients from Abaya, Austin, the Hollands, Samuel and Mary Bowles, her cousin. So we have lots of references. So it's definitely something from 50 all the way through again to 82 is a color that she's thinking about and thinking about in different ways from in her most productive years, writing years from 50 to 82. And these are just, again, on the slide if you want them. Different people are saying about purple in different poems, right? Some fabulous critics have done some fabulous work already on Dickinson and purple. But with Prince, we have the song Purple Rain, right? So we have you can't escape, obviously, purple and the images and the symbolism in this particular song. And here are all the lyrics for you. The associations with, for Prince, as he said it, purple pertains to the end of the world, blood in the sky. And others reading about it as a live validation of virtuosity. Reading about the poem, this interests me in terms of one of the critics talking about in the poem, Prince adopts the persona of a preacher, of a new secular gospel of rock music, and his intentions to be our new leader and a call to arms for the marginalized. And I'm thinking, of course, I can do something with the Dickinson poems, thinking about purple and purple rain, end of the world, and the persona setting themselves up as a leader. So if you remember the Dickinson poems, it's really too many from which to choose, right? To do any sort of work or think about with those two. But what I ended up doing was with Franklin 249. And in the end, I had several winners. I had a bracketology going, and I had several different winners. And in the end, it was the last line that said, I'm going to use this one that ends in, I guess, right? Because I want to leave it open for everyone here and now, and anyone who might look on the YouTube later, that there are lots of different directions that doing a comparison between Emily Dickinson's poetry, Purple, and Prince's understanding of Purple Rain in that particular song. And I'm just focusing on the lyrics in the song, not even touching on the movie itself. But this particular poem, you're right, the way is narrow and difficult the gate, and few there be, correct again, that enter in thereat. 'Tis costly, so are purples. 'Tis just the price of breath, but with the discount of the grave, termed by the brokers death. And after that, there's heaven, the good man's dividend, and bad men go to jail, I guess. Right? And so this, to me, I think is one of the parallels that we might take to with Prince's Purple Rain, and in particular Prince's comment about Purple Rain being about the end of the world and a preacher standing up, but at the same time, both of them poking fun at. And really, if you're going to take Prince as your priest or Emily Dickinson as your the person who's going to explain the biblical teachings to you, you deserve that last line, I guess, right? It really is in the end up to you. And purple, it works so well because it does not mean just one thing. It means multiple things, right? So again, Emily Dickinson, Purple. Maybe you've bought this, maybe not. Either way, thank you. Nobody yelling at me during this.
That that was great. Thank you, Thank you so much. It was such a
Fabulous.
pleasure to be dwelling on the symbolism of color, which of course is really important for Dickinson, and singling out purple, and thinking about how that works across two very different artists was really inspiring. I'm sure we all enjoyed the meditation. So thank you so much, Jan. So finally, we have Regina Yoong, but my heart of love laid bare to you. Regina, do you have a PowerPoint to share?
I do. I think yeah, thank you for sharing the slide. I only have one slide.
Oh, okay. So the title, But My Heart of Love Laid Bare to You, Religion and Womanhood in Christina Rossetti's Monna, Innominata, a sonnet of sonnets, and Emily Dickinson's selected poems. Thank you, Regina. Oh,
Thanks, Liza.
and is it possible to make the slide bigger? Have you tried Peric or Henry?
Yeah, I think just clicking the slideshow on the
If you
top
click the
right.
slideshow button on the upper right-hand side, maybe? Upper right-hand side, at least in the view. On upper right-hand side.
Top right corner.
It's up with conference. Yeah.
It's next to share,
Yeah.
Eric. That's you. Upper right-hand.
Okay. It's good.
If I don't know, maybe it's your left, Eric, but there, yes.
Yeah.
It's to share slideshow. That's
Yay.
exactly. And
Thank
maybe
you.
that will work. There we go. Excellent. Is that the whole slide, Regina?
Yeah.
Okay,
Yes.
let's
Thank
go.
you. Really honored to be part of this panel. Thank you, Faye, Stephen, and Anne for sharing like the different connections. Like that was really fascinating. My connection is focusing more on the religious connections between Christina Rossetti and Emily Dickinson. So on the left is one of the poems, one of the sonnets from Monna Innominata, Sonnet 9, and on the right is A Little East of Jordan. And so I've been thinking about the theme a little more as seams include the ball, and thinking about seams how it's binding, right? Two very different, sometimes even heavy fabric together. And so I'll be interested in just presenting this to see what sort of religious tension or connections you see emerging. I wanted to express a warm thank you or to magnify the gratitude to the Emily Dickinson Society, the Critical Institute, and even Elizabeth Petrino for leading our session last year in Taiwan, where an earlier version of this paper was workshopped, and that was really beneficial for myself. So here, a little bit about Christina Rossetti. So she wrote Monna Innominata towards the end of her life, and people were saying like, "Oh, this is nothing really like Goblin Market. It's really underwhelming in that sense." And so, because of what different scholars were saying, I was like, "Oh, let's pick up the sonnets here and see why was it so underwhelming in comparison." And I found that people will often view her as prudish, right? Very commonly, if you're a religious, devoted woman, you're seen as a prude, right? Passive self-denial. But here I was trying to draw out things more on how Rossetti would draw out religious uncertainty and doubt to sort of a human agency. And that is also compared to Dickinson. They do it a little differently. So as critic Amy Billion asserts, Rossetti uses sonnet restrained form to mimic the Christian discipline of conforming to spiritual values, making the rejection of worldly fulfillment as some sort of energetic, active, and even exciting endeavor, than rather a passive collapse or surrender, right? Their poetic seams are dynamic, unstable, and a little lively at the same time. And so on the left, you can see Monna Innominata 9. Monna Innominata means the unknown woman, and Rossetti tears open the historical Petrarchan sonnet, a form featuring silent women, right? Idealized female muse to ensure that the woman speaks for herself in her poems. So Monna and Innominata is a 14 sonnet series and the purpose was really to give voice to silent women of, early Italian poetry. You see that she opens with a line from Dante and Petrarch here, who both wrote about Beatrice and Laura. Their muses were very famous during their time. However, these women were mostly silent objects. Right, so here, I'll do a brief translation. I know nothing about Latin, so maybe Stephen, you can step in and say, like, no, that's not quite the accurate translation. But the first line, I understand it to mean, "O noble conscience, and without a stain." And the second line by Petrarch is, "More vivid spirit of ardent virtue." So the praise, right? There is. And so looking at Sonnet 9 here, I'll just draw our attention here to the last few lines here. Talking about the wrestle here, right? "But take at morning, wrestle till the break of day, but when wield power with God and man. So take I heart of grace as best I can, ready to spend and be spent for your sake." So there's this sense of wrestling till morning, probably referring to Jacob and wrestling with the angel, right, in the Bible. And here, she enacts a sort of Pauline posture of obedience. "I would gladly spend myself and all I have for you." This is very noble, sacrificial love here. But her last line here, "So take I heart of grace as best I can," right, reveals, hey, maybe it's a little bit shaky, and deeply human resolve. I'm trying my best here, right? I will be like Paul, but it's not that simple, right? There's a little bit of a tension here. The agency in sacrifice, a scholar called this her sort of struggle a cruel chastity, right? But here I see it as her sort of sacrifice or radical belief in surrendered love has a sort of freedom and freedom in it. Her God is not someone that's just harsh, like tyrant, forcing her to give up things, but is staged for a deeply intimate dramatization of faith. So there's a lot going on there, centered around love, right? In Dickinson's Little East of Jordan here, there's a sort of a different tone, right? A gymnast and an angel did wrestle long and hard. That's the first stanza here. And then till morning touching mountain and Jacob waxing strong, the angel begged permission to breakfast to return. Right here is, God is not having the upper hand here, right? The angel begged for permission to go to breakfast. And so there's a sort of a fun jab at God, or the sort of religious connection here. Almost blasphemous, one would say. And even later, in the third stanza, "Not so, said cunning Jacob, I will let thee go, except thou bless me, stranger." So here, you see this, unlike Rossetti, who finds agency through sacrificial surrender, Dickinson takes a very dramatic stance. She belittles God to almost like to reclaim her autonomy there, right? In a fun way, I would say, right? And so why? And to prove that even a weaker entity like Jacob, or maybe a woman, can wield power and claim equal recognition and demand a blessing on her own terms. So thinking back about the way they challenge spiritual doubt and even divinity, without even relinquishing intellectual and spiritual power. So they're both not passive victims. They do it in different ways. Rossetti is more active in her choice to spend and be spent, whereas Dickinson is more audacious. And even at the end, he found he had worsted God. I think yesterday when I was reading this again, I'm curious on what you all think about worsted God. Like, does she mean that she has succeeded in defeating God, or worsted? I looked up. It also means like spinning off a yarn. So I'm very curious. That was actually a new sort of insight and question I had reading Dickinson yesterday. So fertile ground for discussion and even analysis. So really just focusing on a religious connection and the transatlantic bridge between Christina Rossetti and Emily Dickinson. They did not quite meet. They did not write letters to each other, but yet they share this bond. Well, talking specifically for Jacob wrestling and this religious tension has really captivated my attention. All right. That's all from me. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Regina. That was a lot in a brief time. And the comparison is really fascinating. And maybe because you have a little bit more time, we could start with you in terms of thinking about the connections. And you could say where you think you might be going with this idea of women, two women speaking not as muses. That seems to be part of it, right? Two non-silent women writing poetry in a tradition where women are silent muses, and how that relates to the figure of wrestling with a superior spiritual figure, male figure. Do you have a sense of where you're moving with this idea?
So I think definitely fascinated with the sort of religious uncertainty and how, unlike Dickinson, Rossetti plays with a very restrained sonnet form, right? While also giving this full or like presentation of doubt and dramatization of faith, right? It's not just clear cut, okay, I'm going to give up and surrender to you. Whereas this tension of love, I can't do it, I'm very human, I'm still struggling. So I think I'm trying to capture how both of them do it very differently. Dickinson has more freedom in terms of her writing, the metaphor she's using, whereas Rossetti is trying to do it super in restrained biblical phrases,
Yeah.
this
So
sort of
a very different formally. They're
yes,
they're addressing similar issues, and it's not like one is more conservative than the other simply because the
right,
form is more
right.
conservative.
Mhm,
That's very
mhm.
interesting. So yeah, let's open it up to questions, and we'll start for all these connections, and maybe finding connections between the connections. But maybe Martha, Nell, and Henry have things to say directly related to Regina's paper.
I
Martha, Nell?
just have, first of all, I want to praise all of you. This is just fabulous. But Regina, um, and I think we talked about this a while ago, but maybe my feeble little brain forgets. And maybe I missed, but did you talk about Margaret Homans in your paper at all?
I did.
Okay, and I'm sorry I missed it, but I just sort of wanted to bring that forward because that's a book that kind of gets lost because it's quote unquote old, but it's really great.
Right. Yeah, I did mention it in my presentation. I was actually picking like, oh, what do I do with this 25-page article and what to really present? But yes, Margot Holman's is a big influence for me.
Yeah.
Yeah, she's still really vibrant, Margaret Holman's readings, and it's true
Yeah.
that people have that she's kind of gotten forgotten in some ways, and not rightly so. So thanks, Martha, Nell, for that. Henry?
So again, thank you very much for this wonderful talk. And I think for me, it's less of a question, but it's more like a discussion with Regina. Because I really like at the end of your presentation, you did mention that because there's no direct letter exchanges between like Dickinson and Christina Rossetti, and that reminds me of different kinds of transatlantic models or even like comparative models, right? Some models prefer to have direct connections between writers, and some models focus more on the actual textual reverberations. but some models they focus more on just the conceptual correspondences, whether or not these two writers actually know each other, have engagement with each other, that doesn't matter that much, right? So for you personally, what kind of models that matter the most when you are doing this kind of comparison reading or textual analysis? Just like your personal preference or even your preposition, kind of like that. Yeah, thank you.
That's a great comment. I think what fascinates me the most is sort of the religious form that they're playing within and how Dickinson for me always has a lot of fun in her poem, whether she's talking about something very somber or in particular religious connotations as well. So I would say the concept here is always about religious forms and how they're playing within the sort of like say even a sonnet form, right? The silent muse, whereas there's this restraint on the woman figure and how Rossetti is trying to overturn that. So religious form in terms of it could be forms in terms of sonnets or just the themes of God being a male figure. So a little bit of gender as well as religious structures.
I wonder if Anne might want to. Anne and you, Regina, are similar in the way that the question, Henry, that you're asking could also go to Anne about the principle of selection and what informs it. So, Anne, would you like to check in before Emily asks her question?
No, I'd rather let Emily go ahead and ask.
Okay, great. Emily.
I'll be quick because Anne, I was going to ask you something in addition with these parallels. Um, so Regina, there's a really interesting use of that passage with the wrestling with the angel in I think it's a late letter to Higginson. Dickinson writes, "I will not let thee go before I bless thee," as opposed to being blessed. Where she does an inversion of the statement in the text, and she does that fairly frequently with scripture and other things. So that to me would be an additional parallel to look at. And then thinking about worsted God, for me, part of that poem alludes to the notion of none see God and live. And though the angel is a representation of God, the Jacob's wrestling directly with the angel suggests a kind of worsting, that and a binding, even worsted, if you want to use that meaning, in this just some interesting things to pursue. And Anne, I was just struck by the wonders of the purples in Dickinson, as well as the way in which you connected that. Wonderful parallels there, and would love to hear more about that and some other. You said you considered some other possible connectedness, and you wanted to go really out there. What are some of the other connections you might make?
Well, I have done in 2024 at another conference. I was able to do a presentation and PowerPoint on the white dresses of Emily Dickinson and Taylor Swift. So that was a lot of fun.
We'll probably see some of that tomorrow morning.
Yeah.
Yeah. Peric.
Hi, so I've got two questions. So let's start off with Stephen. I'd like to ask you, did her use of Latin change across her lifetime? Because you spoke a little bit about her early life and her letters to Sue, and I just wondered, did she come back to Latin more later on, or was it something that was part of her earlier life?
Her direct use of Latin words occurred early. When she was just starting out writing poetry.
the influence of Latin occurred at all times, but appeared to me to be most significant during the Civil War period, where she wrote most of her poems. That the death poem, when her friend died, she said, put it in Latin. Other poems at that time have an oblique relationship to Latin, but I think it's there. But I think the influence was throughout her life, but it seemed more prominent early.
And do you have any theory about that? Like, have you thought about why that might be? You don't have to answer. I'm just curious.
One is her relationships with her friends that she went to school with, like Abby. Uh, those eventually faded off a little bit because the people went away. With Susan, it lingered, with Susan Gilbert, but with others, she didn't see them anymore. Um, but I think when she talks about things that are overwhelmingly emotional, some of those times she uses things reminiscent of the Latin classics and the Greek classics. Um, when she talks about her poems lasting, she uses words that have a Latin origin and are very influential in her Latin textbook. We know what textbook she used for Latin. It was actually a college textbook as well as used at the academy. Um, and she uses words like inflection, words meaning, philology. This occurred throughout her life. It was probably a little more marked in the early years of writing poetry.
Thank you. And can I just squeeze one in? A question for Anne. You mentioned purple, but what about rain? What about rain in Dickinson? And what about Scarlet Rain, which is one of the most famous kind of images from one of her poems? The name of it is awesome. So I just wondered, because you mentioned purple, but what about rain?
Yeah. And Cheryl brought up the Scarlet Rain in the comments. So yeah, I missed that one completely. It was a matter of time. 10, 15-minute presentation. I originally planned to do both purple and rain, and it just wasn't feasible. So yes, most certainly is something I'd like to do.
Martha, no. Martha, you're muted
Yeah,
still.
I get it. I get it. I just had a problem. Um, Park, that was a great question about rain. But Steve, back to you. You said that she uses Latin more during the Civil War. Did I hear that correctly?
So I didn't make a tabulation, but that seems
But but that's your sense. And so is she seeing it more in publications, in newspapers, and there are a lot of Civil War publications that last for like 2 months, 3 months, a year, and then disappear.
uh, she's seeing Latin reception. Um, there are like heroic poems in Latin about giving your life for your fatherland. There's a very famous one.
Right.
Uh, and I'm sure she's seeing poems that have to do with the classical tradition, but may not necessarily be in Latin. Um, I'd have to check the uh, table of contents of the Atlantic because there were
Yeah.
things published that had to do with classics in the Atlantic, including things related I could not about stopping for death and the classical aspects of Demeter and Persephone and death and the sun. And I think she uses um, some of these publications, and when she writes her poem, at least it's in the back of her mind. As an example, in her poems, I Could Not Stop for Death, there's a sun that sees and goes ahead. And in almost all the classical descriptions of the rape of Persephone, the sun isn't there, but it's in one of them. It's in one of them. And I think there was a recent a publication in the Atlantic that brings it up as well as in one of her classical textbooks. Uh, but I don't have a firm answer, and it's just my gut feeling that it seemed to be more common then.
Very quickly, I'll just say, did you see the article? Oh, sorry.
Yeah. Well, Martha, would you like to finish the
Just very
question?
quickly, I'll say, did you see the article? It was either in the New York Times or the Washington Post that we think we're smarter or we sound smarter when we use polysyllables and Latinate words. Did you see that?
I didn't see it, but it's a pretentious thing that can happen.
I'll send it to you. It's hilarious. It's great.
Next to a
Vivian.
one syllable Anglo-Saxon derived word. She would mix them. She would integrate them.
Yeah.
I'm sorry to cut you off, Stephen. Vivian.
So I'm fascinated by all of this, but especially by the conversation about Latin, because I'm doing an edition of her friend Joseph Bardwell Lyman's letters, many of which were written during the Civil War. And he was classically trained and very proud of it, Yale, class of 1850 and so forth, as well as Amherst Academy and Williston Seminary, where he was the friend of Austin Dickinson's. But to cut to the chase, he uses tons of Latin tags the way Dickinson does in her early work. But after his 18 months serving in the Confederate Army and spending time in the hospitals as he does and seeing the horrors that he does see, that's it for him. In other words, that's an early phase of his career, and the present and the vernacular becomes overwhelming.
Thanks for that, Vivian. Elizabeth.
Thank you. These were wonderful papers, and I hate to take us away from Latin, but I wanted to ask Faye a question, if I could. So, Faye, I'm fascinated by Dickinson's global reception, how Dickinson is transmitted to contemporary poets and the kind of relevance and currency that she continues to have in other national literary traditions. So particularly the way you were talking about translating into Filipino, it sounds as though translation has become a political act in some ways. And specifically, I loved how you were saying that there was a type of English that you found in Dickinson, which in some ways was more original, more revolutionary, and kind of evaded the English that was being imposed by foreign powers, right? So thinking about that, could you reflect a little bit on what is the attraction, for translating Dickinson into Filipino, and does it serve the purpose of just making her canon more accessible, or are there ways in which translating a canonical American female poet gives a kind of intellectual currency to what is happening in the Philippines? Any thoughts you have?
I actually shared about this, no, that so I went to an art school in high school, and that was where I first read a Dickinsonian poem, and I had a hard time learning creative writing in English, no, because for various reasons, no, I didn't really grow up speaking English in school, etc. So I had a hard time mastering creative writing in English. But with Dickinson, when I saw her, the way she plays with language, the way she breaks the rules, so to speak, that I think that really appealed to me, and that gave me that really inspired me read more of her works and eventually translate her to Filipino. And then when I got deep into translating Dickinson, I really learned a lot. No, I always say that it's like visiting a deep forest, and then after having successfully translated the poem, it feels like I've just gotten out of the forest. So I think that's the appeal of Dickinson to me. But about translation as a political act, it that's that's uh a strong that's more relevant now, that statement here in the Philippines, because translation is not really an industry here in the Philippines. There aren't many translation institutes. It's not really being taught in schools, in universities. It's expensive to translate foreign works, or to even translate Filipino works to foreign languages, no? So it's really a privilege to be able to translate here in the Philippines. So whoever can translate, or whoever gets the opportunity to translate, surely uses that opportunity to to put across the messages that have to be have to be told to the world.
Faye, has your book been out long enough that you have some sense of its reception? What have readers thought about your translation?
We launched it maybe 1 month ago.
Oh,
so
okay.
so
So
now
it's early.
yeah,
It would be
but
very
because
interesting to hear.
it's a small press that published it, we could only afford to print a few copies, so just 500 copies, no. So we're trying to reach out to teachers, how we want to teach Dickinson to teachers, and to teach translation also to Filipino teachers, how they can use the Filipino translations of Dickinson to teach poetry and other other subjects.
That's so wonderful. I hope that you can keep us posted. So I want to thank everyone for just such a generative and wonderful panel, and the talks have been so exciting so far, just generally. I'm wondering if I should turn this. So yes, let's another round of applause, not just for this panel, but for all the talks that we've heard today that have been so wonderful. I'm wondering if I should turn it over to Parik or Dan to say a couple of words about what comes next.